Okay, I'm back over here, but I'm not ready yet. I'm just turning the thing on. Good morning, Jill. Again, good morning, Christian. I got the, oh, heck. All right. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, there was some echo in the background. Christian Agape, is this Deus or Plymouth Brethren? Yeah, I like the Plymouth Brethren. I don't know what Deus is. Oh, yeah, we believe in the deity. Yeah, the deity of God, because we're going to read that chapter called the deity of God in just a moment. As soon as I get my copy and get things set up, let me bring it up on the screen. So this will be a reading of this chapter from the Problem of Evil. Okay, I'll be right back. Um, Deborah, you're in charge. Make these guys behave. I'm so excited. And I just can't hide it. But I know, I've got to. Okay. Christian Agape says, what denomination are you? Well, I used to be. Back in 1967, I was so-called born again in the Pentecostal Holiness Church. And then in the 70s, I was hanging out with the Charismatics. I moved, you know, I've been to Baptist churches and some other churches anyway. And you asked earlier if I was Plymouth Brethren. I kind of like those guys, the Plymouth Brethren. I admit that I have been influenced by their teachings. I do like John Nelson Darby. Anyway, so I've been to a lot of churches, and I've been kicked out of enough churches that I don't claim any of them anymore. How's that for an answer? Okay. All right, boys and girls, we are ready to get this show on the road. What we have before us is a chapter in Mr. Knoch's book. Oh, Mr. Knoch used to be Plymouth Brethren back in the late 1800s. Probably got kicked out of the Plymouth Brethren along about 1905. The Problem of Evil and the Judgments of God is the title of this book. We're picking up from page what? Let's see, page 194. And this chapter is called The Deity of God. And thank the Lord, it's not about the deity of Satan, because Satan ain't that clever. Ready? Get set, go. If God purposed that sin would enter the world, why did he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what was planned he should do? Well, that's a question, and it's in quotes, so somebody else is asking that, I guess. If God purposed, because Mr. Knoch does teach that nothing is happening in this world apart from God's counsel. Ephesians 1:11 says God is operating all things according to the counsel of his will. Okay, so I'm guessing that is in this section of the essay, the long essay that we call The Problem of Evil and the Judgments of God, somebody's coming along and saying, if God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what was planned he should do? Anyway, on the surface, this question seems reasonable and right, but beneath its demands for fairness lies the most malignant of all sins. God is put in the same category with man. What? Now, I want you to know that when I first read this book, The Problem of Evil, 40 years ago, I thought it was really deep. But on reading it this go round, I'm suspecting that this is just basic Christianity. This is basic to our faith. This whole discussion. It's not deep at all. It's just the whole thing makes sense now. But I had to unlearn a lot of Christianity before I could understand that God is God. And God created all, including evil, for his purpose. Okay, let's try it again. If God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what it was planned he should do? On the surface, this question seems reasonable and right, but its demands for fairness lies in the most malignant of all sins. God is put in the same category with man. Let me put the underline under that too. What does he mean by this? Oh my. Okay, he is placed on trial. God is placed on trial by a jury of his peers. He is called into account as though he were a criminal. We were gods, high and mighty, and far more just than God. It denies his deity. It undermines his supremacy. Man takes his empty throne and is seated in the place of power. Oh my goodness. Okay, we got all of this from the initial opening question, the silly gotcha question that says, if God purposed that sin should enter into the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what it was planned he should do? All right, when the great apostle of the nations was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer it. When the great apostle, that's Paul, of the nations, was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer it. Romans 9:19. None who ask it can be enlightened unless first of all they take the place which becomes them in his august presence. When the great apostle of the nations was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer it. Romans 9:19. Hang on, I got to find out what Romans 9:19 says specifically. So let me open it up and read it to you. Okay, I'm almost there. Okay, verse 18 says, we're going to look at 19, but 18 says, consequently then, to whom he will, he is merciful, yet to whom he will, he is hardening. And verse 19 says, you will be protesting to me then, why is God still blaming for who has withstood his intention? You will be protesting to me then, why is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? And Paul's answer is, oh man, who are you to be sure, who are answering again to God? That which is molded will not protest to the molder, saying, why did you make me thus? Has not the potter the right over the clay out of the same kneading to make one vessel indeed for honor, yet one for dishonor? Well, there we go. Paul didn't even really answer the question. He just repeated the question to show how silly the question is. When the great apostle of the nations was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer it. Romans 9:19. None who ask it can be enlightened unless, first of all, they take the place which becomes them in his august presence. So we echo the apostles' reply. Of those who seek to overthrow the truth by questioning God's right to do what he does, we simply ask, who are you? Isn't that a great answer? Who are you? We have no controversy with them. Their quarrel is with God. Until they bow to the Creator and acknowledge that they are merely creatures, his ways will be hidden and his doings will be devious and dark. Oh my God. Oh my God. All right, so let's try this again. So when some goofball comes along and says, if God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what was planned he should do? And so the brother Knoch basically says that that this is the same question basically from uh, that we find in Romans 9:18. You will be protesting to me then. Why is he still blaming? Why is God blaming Satan for making Satan do exactly what he has done? Why is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? Well, anyway, when the great apostle was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer it. None who ask it can be enlightened unless, first of all, they take their place, which becomes them in his august presence. So we echo the apostle's reply. Those who seek to overthrow the truth by questioning God's right to do what he does, we simply ask, who are you? Huh? We have no controversy with them. Their quarrel is with God. Until they bow to the Creator and acknowledge that they are merely creatures, his ways will be hidden and his doings devious and dark. This question is but an echo of man's objection to God's dealings with Pharaoh. You will be protesting to me then. Why then is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? What is the Spirit's answer to such insolence? Oh man, who are you to be sure who are answering again to God? That which is molded will not protest to the molder. Why? Why? Why did you make me like this? Or has not the potter, the right over the clay out of the same kneading to make one vessel indeed for honor, yet one for dishonor? Romans 9:19 through 21. Yahweh said, quote, I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh, end quote. Exodus 7:3. Yahweh said it. I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh. Elsewhere, two other Hebrew words are used. One of them is elsewhere translated encourage, establish, strengthen, fortify, etc. Why should it have a special meaning when applied to Pharaoh? Pharaoh's heart was weak. It had to be fortified after the very first infliction. Exodus 7:22. After the second, he called for Moses and Aaron and told them he would let the people go. Exodus 8:8. After the third infliction, after the third, it was again fortified. After the fourth, he was weakened once more and promised to let the people go into the wilderness. Exodus 8:28. While God had to encourage the king's heart, Pharaoh took the honor and glory to himself. This is entirely obscured in our versions where three distinct terms are all rendered harden. The third term is the same as that in the precept honor thy father and thy mother. It never has the sense of harden. Pharaoh honored or glorified his own heart. Exodus 8:15 and 32. And then look at 28 also. And Exodus 9:34. God's answer to this is in the same terms. Quote, then the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I am glorified over Pharaoh. I am glorified over Pharaoh. Is that the same word as hardened? Exodus 14:18. Nothing is more mistaken than the supposition that the Pharaoh of the oppression was a mighty strong heart, whom nothing could move, and that his persistent opposition brought his destruction. His heart was infirmed and faltering from the first to the finish. He sought one compromise after another, but whenever he was weakened, Yahweh made steadfast his heart so that he refused to carry out his concessions. It is useless for us to seek to evade the facts. Moses said, quote, thus says Yahweh, dismiss my people that they may serve me. End quote. Exodus 10:3. Pharaoh said, go. Exodus 10:8. Yet Yahweh made the heart of Pharaoh steadfast so that he did not dismiss the sons of Israel. Exodus 10:20. Wow. The ruler of Egypt was the merest puppet in the hands of God. The ruler of Egypt was the merest puppet in the hands of God. Pharaoh did not think he was a puppet. He was conscious of no external coercion. He gloried in the influx of a mysterious might that enabled him to recover from his spells of fear and answer these miserable Hebrew slaves as they deserved. Herein lies the real essence of what is misnamed free will. It is simply that men are not conscious of coercion. Their volition is not really the independent deity it seems to be. Ooh, man, Mr. Knoch is getting down here. In fact, let me underline that, baby. Their volition is not really the independent deity it seems to be. Let me adjust my little underline tool here. So the human free will is not really the independent deity. It seems to be. That's interesting that he calls the human free will a deity, because the free willers actually speak as if their own free will is a deity. They worship their so-called free will. It is much the product of law as all else in nature. It is a composite of the interior and exterior forces in which they have their being. Free will is the insensibility brought on by the anesthetic and anesthetic ignorance. Free will is the insensibility brought on by the anesthetic ignorance. I guess he's trying to say somebody used anesthesia on them and made them go to sleep, and then their sleepiness, they are ignorant of what the hell they're doing. And they call that free will. Anesthetic ignorance. The important point for us to fix firmly is the fact that okay, before I start on, allow me to put the invite in case a good egg or bad egg wants to hop in, because we love both good eggs and bad eggs, don't you know? You need a wrench, Tommy? Okay. It'll cost me a click. Since I'm in the mood, how about you, Deborah? You want to wrench too? Okay. Since I did put you in charge a few moments ago. 5-minute timeout for trolls. Okay, the important point for us to fix firmly is the fact that God was apparently working to counter his revealed will. Oh, that's the thing we all don't get when we first come across this notion of the deity of God, that he can do whatever the hell he wants and he doesn't have to inform us of what he's doing. It looks like God is working counter to his revealed will. He told Pharaoh, let my people go. And then he hardened Pharaoh's heart over and over and over again. The scripture says so 9 times that he hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not do his will. Can I get an amen? Okay, I'll give myself an amen. The important thing for us to fix firmly in our minds is the fact that God was apparently working in Pharaoh to counter his revealed will. But it is but natural for us to suppose that if he said that he wanted his people let go, he would use his influence with Pharaoh to effect their deliverance. Did you catch that? It is but natural for us to suppose that if things work like we think they should, that if God said to Pharaoh that he wanted his people let go, well, he would use God would use his influence to help Pharaoh let him go. But no, God did the opposite. He kept him there so that he could bring about 10 different plagues. And this was the work of God. It is but natural for us to suppose that if he had said he wanted his people to go, he would use his influence with Pharaoh to effect their deliverance. But we forget the divine purpose behind it all. That's an important word, and I want to underline it, so you just hold on a second. We forget the divine purpose behind it all. Israel's liberation and exodus and Pharaoh's defeat were not the end in view. They were merely the means. The immediate purpose was the revelation of God's power. The ultimate purpose is the complete revelation of himself. All knowledge is relative. The greatness of God's power can only be grasped by contrast with another similar power. Egypt's greatness and strength must be established before God's might can be manifest by its overthrow. And if the ruler of Egypt begins to melt before God's might, he must be held together long enough to stand up before the onslaughts of Yahweh. Man's puny power must actually be reinforced by God before it can even form a foil for the display of his strength. Wow. The physical is a parable of the spiritual. Almost all locomotion or progress is the result of 2 counteracting forces. The major or applied power is modified by a minor or secondary force. Were the ships that cross the sea compelled to sail before the wind, they would seldom reach a haven. The helmsman holds the vessel across the path of the breeze by pitting the water against the wind. Any sailor will acknowledge that the force that holds the ship to its course is quite as necessary to its usefulness as the driving power. Gravity is the essential counterforce on land. Without it, we could not walk or ride. However much it may weigh on us and tire us, we could make no progress whatsoever without gravity. In walking, we lift our feet from the ground. They would continue to leave the earth but for gravity. We could not put them down again, for if we have no support, we have no support for a downward thrust unless we are walking in a tunnel. But for gravity, a vehicle could ascend a hill as easily as go down. Indeed, it could do neither. But for gravity, a vehicle could ascend a hill as easily as go down. Indeed, it could do neither, for it would soon leave the ground and lose all of its power of traction. The principle of two opposing forces is contained in almost all methods of utilizing mechanical energy. Every motorist knows that to get the full effect of his fuel, the momentum of an internal combustion engine must compress the charge after it has been exploded in order to produce practical results. These forces must not be equally balanced, of course, or the engine will stall. In operation, when the charge explodes, it is not immediately allowed to propel the piston, but the inertia of the engine compresses it for a brief instant, greatly increasing its potential power. After this, it is allowed to do its proper work. If anyone wishes a practical example of the principle we are discussing, let him try to crank a motor with the spark advanced to running position. Remember, this book was written 100 years ago, back when they actually did crank the motor to start an old-fashioned car. They didn't have electric starters at the time. If anyone wishes a practical example of the principle we are discussing, let him try to crank a motor with the spark advanced to running position. The explosion will force the engine backwards, and so forcefully that it will endanger the hand or the arm of anyone who does not take due precautions. The electric dynamo is gradually replacing other methods of producing power, so that in civilized lands, it bids fair to become the main medium of motion and light and even heat. Suppose we should build a dynamo driven by water power. We will take cores of soft iron and wind wire around them to make an armature. We will mount these so that water will set them whirling, but we will get no electricity. No practical effect is produced. Now, however, let us add some magnets and place the poles so that they will pull the armature in the opposite direction. Now we have two opposing forces. The result is that we get an electric current. We may not be able to reason out the physical facts that an opposing power is essential, but we know that it works. The moment we draw the counterforce, it ceases to be practical. This subtle form of energy, which can be known only from its effects, is one of the closest approximations to the divine spirit which we have. Wow. The only way this physical power can be known is by the same principle which God used in the case of Pharaoh. As we behold the grand orbs of space, we are appalled at the power displayed. The moon, the sun, the myriads of stars all present such staggering exhibitions of physical force that our imagination reels and refuses to follow the facts. But these immense masses as well as the most minute particles of matter in the universe, are held in place by the opposite of two forces, not by one. The moon, for instance, like every other object above Earth, is constantly falling. With a tremendous impact it would make if it were not held aloft by a counteracting centrifuge motion which seeks to make it fly off into space. These are offered simply as illustrations to enable us to grasp the truth taught in God's word that he pits his power against itself and introduces conflict into creation so as to guide it into the path which leads to perfection. Had Pharaoh obeyed the will of God, Yahweh's purpose would have been defeated. There would have been no mighty portents, no restraining of the Red Sea, no bloodless battle, no defeat of Egypt's armies by a rabble of slaves. God's indignation and power would have remained below the horizon of human perception. Perhaps no other event has so impressed mankind with the sovereign power of Yahweh as the deliverance of his people out of Egypt. Israel never did and never will forget it. Only a few millenniums have passed since Yahweh led his people from the land of bondage. Yet millions of men have marveled at the might and majesty which it manifested. The suffering involved has been justified thousands of times by the lessons which it has conveyed. With the indisputable and undeniable facts before us, we pray God's forgiveness beforehand for so much as staging the farce of bringing the divine majesty before the bar of human folly. We repeat the question which we began, suiting it to the circumstances attending the exodus of Egypt. Quote, if God purposed that Pharaoh should resist his mandate, why did he plague Egypt and drown Pharaoh's host in the Red Sea for doing what he planned that they should do? If God purposed that Pharaoh should resist his mandate, why did he plague Egypt and drown Pharaoh's host in the sea for doing exactly what he planned that they should do? God gives himself replies that it was done to display his indignation and make his power known. Romans 9:22. And who dares to question his right to do as he wills with his own? But for those who bow before his divine majesty, there is a complete and satisfactory solution to the apparent moral obloquy, which seems to cling to such arbitrary despotism. Our mistake lies in this, that we take a small segment of God's dealings with Pharaoh as a public character and treat it as though it were the complete cycle of his dealings with him as an individual. Orthodoxy insists that the die is cast at death. Get it? When you die, it's too late. That's what Orthodoxy says. When you die, it's too late. Your destiny is sealed at your death. If you don't accept Jesus before you die, you're toast. Orthodoxy insists that the die is cast at death according to its teachings. Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God at the Exodus, but he has consciously suffered for his sin ever since and will do so for all eternity. Yeah, when he puts it that way, it does sound like a silly notion, doesn't it? And it's worth underlining. Orthodoxy insists that the die is cast at death. According to Orthodoxy's teachings, Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God's exodus at the Exodus. Whoa, that's not right. According to Orthodoxy teaching, Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God at Exodus, but he has consciously suffered ever since and will do so for all eternity. The annihilationist view is far more merciful to Pharaoh, for he does not receive any punishment in death and suffers extinction after enduring the penalty of his acts. The revolt against God's deity has its roots in the unreasonable and irreconcilable doctrines of human destiny. Man, the revolt against God's deity. The word deity just means that God's in charge, right? That God is the only deity and there's no one beside him. So get over it. The revolt against God's deity has its roots in these unreasonable and irreconcilable doctrines of human destiny. Once we allow God to complete the broken record of Pharaoh's life, it is easy to justify him, and it is easy for God to justify Pharaoh. The great king is not suffering now before he appears in the judgment to be sentenced. When he does stand before the great white throne, his sentence will be just in accord with his deeds. The judgment will be not merely penal, but corrective and remedial. Its end will be death, in which there is no suffering or consciousness of time. So far as Pharaoh's conscious experience is concerned, his death is immediately followed by his resurrection and ushers him into the judgment. If he was drowned in the waters of the Red Sea, he loses all trace of time until he awakens before the great white throne. The judgment is not simply to condemn; its object is to set right what was wrong. The greatest wrong is his attitude toward God. Pharaoh's greatest wrong was his attitude toward God. In the presence of Christ and the awful throne, this will be corrected by means of the blood of Christ. His life will be justified. Romans 5:18. Oh my goodness, that's so lovely. That deserves to be underlined. Hang on a second while I drag this underlined tool down. By means of the blood of Christ, Pharaoh's life will be justified. As far as Pharaoh's conscious experience is concerned, his death is immediately followed by his resurrection and ushers him into the judgment. If he was drowned in the waters of the Red Sea, he loses all trace of time until he awakens before the great white throne. The judgment is not simply to condemn. Its object is to set right what is wrong. The greatest wrong in Pharaoh's attitude, the greatest wrong is Pharaoh's attitude toward God. In the presence of Christ and the awful throne, this will be corrected by means of the blood of Christ. His life will be justified. Romans 5:18. To some, It may seem inexplicable that when he is brought to the point, he should not immediately join the saints. To some, it seems inexplicable that when he is brought to this point, he should not immediately join the saints and enter into Aeonian bliss. But a little reflection will show that this has never been God's way. We are justified and reconciled. We are justified and reconciled, yet God does not immediately transport us into the ineffable bliss of his presence. How do most of his saints enter the glory? Through the portals of death. Some of the most faithful have actually suffered by fire. And not by fire only, but by tortures unspeakably worse and more prolonged. We do not believe in the theological denial of death embodied in the formula, sudden death, sudden glory. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. Oh, that's worth it. I got to underline that one. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. That's what our message is all about, is Christ was roused from among the dead, and he is the first fruit of them who are reposing. There is no glory for us, believers, or anybody, until the resurrection. The silence of the scriptures and the palpable obscurity of the theologians should be sufficient to convince anyone on this point. Nevertheless, since the dead know nothing, since the dead know not anything, Ecclesiastes 9:5, this statement is true so far as they are aware. In their conscious experience, the moment of response coincides with the moment of awakening. Pharaoh dies the second death, yet to him it is quite as if he entered at once into the unutterable glory of the consummation. Are you following it? Are you following Mr. Knoch? So once they go into the lake of fire, which is the second death, they're dead. They just wait there. They don't have any consciousness. It could be another day. It could be another million years. It's all the same to them. Their conscious experience it ceases when they enter the second death. Just like when they enter the first death, they're not conscious. Time is irrelevant. So Pharaoh's next conscious moment after the second death will be the unutterable glory of the consummation. Through water, he entered into the resurrection. Through fire, he enters vivification. Thus, he is justified, vivified, and reconciled. He is a notable example of those whom God locks up in stubbornness, Romans 11:32. He is a notable example of those whom God locks up in stubbornness, Romans 11:32. In his case, as in all others, it is done not to lead to his eternal condemnation, but that God may be merciful to him, Romans 11:32. Christ, who taught his disciples to love their enemies, will display the riches of his heart and the efficacy of his blood in the reconciliation of the invisible sovereignties whom he created, Colossians 1:16 and 20. At that time, no such question will cloud the character of God. So we can well imagine Pharaoh changing it into an affirmation, or rather exaltation. May he acclaim, "Blessed be the God who used my unworthy self to exalt his name and spread his fame. It is an honor to have been trodden beneath his feet." Wow. Will this be the prayer of Pharaoh? Cool. Okay, so at that time, At that time, no such question will cloud the character of God, so we can well imagine Pharaoh changing it to an affirmation, or rather an exaltation. May he acclaim, "Blessed be the God who used my unworthy self to exalt his name and spread his fame. It is an honor to have been trodden beneath his feet." The case of Satan has some points peculiar to the archenemy, but it is the same principle as that of Pharaoh and all of God's opponents. The differences are in degree and detail, not in essence. If God himself encouraged Pharaoh to oppose his revealed will, we are under no necessity of seeking to invent some new God to be his adversary. Pharaoh carried out God's larger purpose while opposing his apparent determination. So Satan is his instrument for producing the necessary alienation, which is the only possible basis for the universal reconciliation. Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Ah, Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Spread the news. Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Let's see, hang on. Freedom in the creature does not consist in the absolute independence of environment, but in accord with it. Freedom in the creature does not create, does not exist, does not consist. Let me get it right, hang on. Freedom in the creature does not consist in absolute independence of environment, but in accord with it. God alone originates action. Wow. Place, time, and circumstance control his creatures. Wow. In reality, they have little to say about the course of their existence as they had about their creation. In yesterday's reading of this, Brother Knoch said, "You didn't choose the date and time of your birth." Or circumstances. Might have said circumstance. You didn't choose the date and the circumstances of your birth. How can you make the brag that you control anything else? Looking for my line. In reality, they have as little to say about the course of their existence as they had in creation. Let's see. Is that what I wanted to underline? Oh, here we go. I wanted to underline this. God alone originates action. Man, that's a lovely phrase. Place, time, and circumstance control his creatures. Place, time, and circumstance control his creatures. In reality, they have as little to say about the course of their existence as they had about their creation, but consciously, within the limits of their own experience, they are allowed the same liberty as Pharaoh had. They may sit upon the throne of their own diminutive personality and fondly dream that they have excluded God from their domain. Of such, the chief is Satan, adversary of Christ and slanderer of God. If judgment were what men think it is, mere punishment for misbehavior, it would be somewhat difficult to see clearly just why Satan should suffer in the lake of fire for having played his part according to the underlying purpose of God. But God's judgment is never such an exhibition of puerile impotence. God's judgment sets matters right. Let me see if I can find. Oh, here it is. Bring it down again. God's judgment sets matters right. Good job, God. During the eons, it will deal with all in accord with his revealed will and in such a fashion that his will coincide with his underlying purpose at the consummation. During the eons, God's judgments will deal with all in accord with his revealed will and in such a fashion that will coincide with his underlying purpose at the consummation. Neither is God's judgment concerned with detached cases, with no reference to its effect on others, especially himself. Neither is God's judgments concerned with detached cases, with no reference to its effect on others, especially himself. He did not make his power known in his dealings with Pharaoh in such a way as to forfeit the regard of all who love justice and righteousness, though such seems to be the case at present. The judgment of Pharaoh will not only set him right, but it will set God right in the eyes of all his creatures. He is God. Hence, he must be absolute ruler. But he will yet show that he is a most benevolent and beneficent rule. His is a most benevolent and beneficent rule. And so, with Satan, his judgment is unique. Why is he not cast into the lake of fire together? Why is he not cast into the lake of fire together with the beast and the false prophet at the beginning of the 1,000 years? Yeah, good question, huh? Most excellent question, worth underlining. Why is Satan not cast into the lake of fire with the beast and the false prophet at the beginning of the 1,000 years? Why? Why, oh God? What the hell are you doing? I got a better plan. Let's put Satan in the lake of fire at the beginning of the 1,000 years. Well, because God still has work for him to do. It would be contrary to the underlying purpose of God that mankind should rebel. If it was contrary to the underlying purpose of God that mankind should rebel at the close of the millennium, why is he kept and loosed in order to bring it about? Some will insist that this rebellion was of the devil, and so it was. But if the mayor of one of our principalities were to set a noted political prisoner loose in order to lead a revolution against the government, there are some hard-headed individuals who would hold him responsible just as much, if not more, than the traitor. Satan's judgment is not a private, but a public affair, quite as much as his previous career. Satan's judgment is not a private, but a public affair, quite as much as his previous career. He is not bound for his own sake, but to restrain his power for evil. He does not make his escape, but is deliberately loosed in order to stir up strife. It is evident that Gog and Magog would not have rebelled apart from his instigation. They are not responsible, quote unquote. Neither could Satan have done it if he had not been set free. He is not responsible, quote unquote. God alone is responsible, for he is the only one who is neither bound nor influenced by exterior force. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan. but repudiate the deity of God. Oh my God. Finally, we're getting down to business on this, the deity of God title. Oh, scoot over too much. Let me adjust the screen here. Because I remember talking to the free will chick some time ago, and I said, I used the phrase the deity of God, and she says, "What's that?" She didn't even understand the phrase. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan but repudiate the deity of God. And you know what? A lot of people do this. They talk about Satan as if he is greater than God, more powerful than God, and accomplishes so much more than God. And they worship him as a deity. And they consign God and his character and abilities, to the dustbin of history, like it doesn't accomplish much. God lost. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan but repudiate the deity of God. They may refuse Yahweh's solemn declaration that he is the creator of evil and place the stable crown on the brow of Satan, and thus rob God of his proper place because their vision of the past has been dimmed by the fogs of tradition. But they cannot confute the fact that in this final eruption of sin, which rehearses briefly its introduction at first, their God goes forth as an obedient vassal of his jailer. The unbinding of Satan is just as much the deliberate act of God as his binding at the beginning of the 1,000 years. It is worthy of note that Satan is one of the few who receive no hearing before the great white throne. As soon as his part is played, he enters the lake of fire. There's no need to inquire into his case. All judicial proceedings are superfluous. With ordinary human beings, the lake of fire means immediate death, but not so with Satan. A man would soon succumb to imprisonment in the abyss. He stood it for 1,000 years. There was no reason to suppose it was a place of suffering. We have no ground for believing that Satan suffers before his doom. The salutary, though severe providence which subdues and softens the hearts of mankind has never been his portion. Some of God's dearest saints have spent a lifetime in pain. They will thank him for it when they realize its benefits. It does not destroy their sense of God's love. It will form the folly for its display. For Satan to enter the consummation with all the unbroken pride and arrogance that are his at the end of the 1,000 years would be unthinkable. Then all creation will have been subdued. Hence, Satan must be the subject of the severest discipline to bring him into subjection to God and in harmony with all creation at the consummation. This is found in the lake of fire. This is not the place where men are judged. Their judgment precedes the lake of fire. Satan suffers in it. There is just as equitable a portion between his life and its rectification as there is in the case of mankind. If men are judged in accord with their deeds, it is only reasonable to assume that Satan's doom should be more severe in accord with his doings. In brief, the case of Satan presents no special difficulties. The case of Pharaoh or of any man presents precisely the same problem. Indeed, our own experience taught to enable us to understand these greater examples. We may refuse to believe that Satan was made a sinner apart from his own choosing, but we can hardly convince even ourselves that we had any choice in our own entrance into the world as we are. Why not ask, if men come into the world of sin without their own volition, what right has God to condemn them? The principle is the same. The answer is the same. God is God, and we are his creatures. How dare you? Yeah. God is God, and we are his creatures. We can see the answer to this problem in creation about us. Romans 8:18 through 24. God has subjected it to vanity. God has subjected creation to vanity. It had no will in the matter, but this is in expectation. We can see the solution in our own experience. We are suffering at the present time, not because God uses us to oppose his will, but because we are making it known. We are making God's will known. It is not stranger to suffer for doing the will of God. Hold on, I got that wrong. Is it not stranger to suffer for doing the will of God than for consciously undoing his decrees? What is this? This is a strange sentence. Is it not stranger to suffer for doing the will of God than for consciously undoing his decrees? Is it not more difficult to see why we should suffer than to understand Satan's judgment? But you say, we have hope. We know that our suffering does not deserve the glory about to be revealed. So with all suffering, it is transcendent, disciplinary, corrective, and leads to the haven of God's heart. Christ died for all, and all will eventually benefit by the efficacy of his blood. If Satan, created to oppose God, were doomed to eternal torment, then we may indeed question the justice of God. If the adversary, formed to destroy, is finally annihilated, then indeed we may wonder if God has done right. So long as we are held by either of these alternatives, we are almost forced to shield the character of God by falling back on the assumption that he is not responsible for the creation of his adversary, and thus we unconsciously drag him from his throne. The doctrine of the deity of the devil is the rational recoil from God's supposed inability to bring his creation to a successful consummation. Hang on, I'll read that one again. Isn't that lovely grammar? You came here for a grammar lesson, right? Screw all these TikTok videos and 120 character Twitter messages. Let's get down and jiggy with a long-winded sentence. Thank God for the literature of 100 years ago. All right. If Satan, created to oppose God, were doomed to eternal torment, then we may indeed question the justice of God. If the adversary, formed to destroy, is finally annihilated, then indeed we may wonder if God has done right. So long as we are held by either of these alternatives, we are almost forced to shield the character of God by falling back on the assumption that he is not responsible for the creation of his adversary. And thus we unconsciously drag him from his throne. The doctrine of the deity of the devil is the rational recoil from God's supposed inability to bring his creation to a successful consummation. But once we see that sin and suffering are parts of the divine process, not the goal, that all will contribute to the full revelation of himself and the utmost blessing of his creatures, we have a destiny which does not demand his dethronement at the beginning. We do not need to fabricate another God to take the blame from his shoulders. In brief, we have a God. Satan's suffering in the lake of fire is essential to God's purpose for both himself and all creation. It is not his end, it is the process by which he is prepared for his ultimate place in the perfected universe. The rational retribution of believing in the triumph of Satan at the close is to deify him at the beginning. Reason demands that one who can thwart God and rob him of the mass of his creatures must be his equal or superior. As a result, we come to the most startling conclusion that very few, even of God's saints, intelligently hold to the proper deity of God. Of course, all will repudiate the charge. They would not think of denying what seems so fundamental, yet their words and their actions all proclaim that God is not God alone, but only one of the Christian pantheon. You guys are busted. It is only as we see his supreme success at the consummation, when he will be all in all his creatures, that we are able to grasp the great truth of the deity of God. Only then can we turn back to the beginning and see him supreme. Only then can we look above the clouds and see him ride out the storm. Only then can we believe him when he says in Isaiah 45, 6-9, I am Yahweh and there is no other, former of light and creator of darkness, maker of good and creator of evil. I, Yahweh, make all these things. Drip down from above heavens and let the skies distill righteousness. Let the earth open up, let salvation bud, and let the righteousness sprout together with it. I, Yahweh, I create it. Would anyone contend with his former? Earthenware of the ground with its artificer. Wow. Okay, I got to read that one again. It is only as we see God's supreme success at the consummation, when he will be all in all his creatures, that we are able to grasp the great truth of the deity of God. Only then can we turn back to the beginning and see him supreme. Only then can we look above the clouds and see him ride the storm. Only then can we believe him when he says in Isaiah 45, 6-9, I am Yahweh and there is no other. Isn't that just lovely? That one verse should answer all of our questions and give us peace about all things. I am Yahweh and there is no other. Former of light and creator of darkness, maker of good and creator of evil. I, Yahweh, make all these things. Drip down from above heavens and let the skies distill righteousness. Let the earth open up. Let salvation bud and let righteousness sprout together with it. I, Yahweh, I created it. Would anyone contend with his former? Earthenware of the ground with its artificer? Wow. What a great ending to that chapter. Okay, we're done with the chapter. Feel free to hop in, baby. And we can revel in the one true God, and there is no other. It says so right there. I am Yahweh and there is no other. There is no other. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Tuesday, December 20th, 7:15 Mountain Time. And I see the skies of the horizon getting ready to brighten up. Probably I'll be able to see the sun in about an hour as it comes over the mountains because we're in a valley here. And let's see if we can gin up some warmth in my coffee from the thermos. Go ahead and tell me what temperature it is. Please unblock LOF. And more Jody with the wrench. Jody needs a wrench. LOF, who is that? Lake of Fire? LOF. Lord of the Flies? LOF. Okay, Jody, let me find you and give you a wrench. I'm scrolling down. Okay, I found Lisa's name, so we'll give Lisa a wrench. And I found Jody's name, and I'll give her a wrench. LOF. What does LOF stand for? I forgot. Man, that coffee is not cold. I don't see anybody in the blocked section, Tommy. So I don't know what to do about LOF. He's not one of the hidden users. So I don't know what to say. I did check. LOF is not in my block section. Law of Faith. Oh, yeah. LOF is Law of Faith. I like that title, Law of Faith. Michael has no wrench. All right, let me go do another wrench thing. All right, so let me go backwards and read all the underlined parts of today's chapter, and then we can scoot out of here. The Deity of God is the chapter we're reading from Mr. Knoch's book called The Problem of Evil and the Judgments of God. And this is the last chapter in the section called The Problem of Evil. The next section is the Judgments of God. So if you want to understand how these judgments of God come into play, and what their role is, stay tuned, boys and girls. We'll read Mr. Knoch's essays on the judgments of God, which are coming up. We'll start them maybe tomorrow. Because evil is not necessarily the judgments of God. Okay, here we go. The Deity of God is today's chapter. On the surface, and I'm just going to read the underlined parts. On the surface, this question seems reasonable. What question? Oh, the question that if God purposed that sin would enter into the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what was planned that he should do? On the surface, this question seems reasonable, but beneath its demands for fairness lies the most malignant of all sins. God is put into the same category with man. He is placed on trial by a jury of his peers. Scrolling down, looking for the next underlined part. Here we go. Their volition, their free will, is not really independent. Is not really the independent deity it seems to be. Their free will is not really the independent deity it seems to be. I thought that was an interesting little quip. The important point for us to fix firmly is the fact that God was apparently working to counter his revealed will. Because he's looking at the story of Pharaoh. And in the story of Pharaoh, we are confused. What's going on here? Why is God hardening his heart? The important point for us to fix firmly is the fact that God was apparently working to counter his revealed will. But we forget the divine purpose behind it all. So God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that Pharaoh would not do his will. So what's going on? You can figure it out. If you don't want to read Mr. Knoch, you can look at Romans chapter 9 and figure it out on your own. God was using Pharaoh for display of his own power. Okay, up next. If God purposed that Pharaoh should resist God's mandate, why did he plague Egypt and drown Pharaoh's host in the Red Sea for doing what he had planned that they should do? God himself replies that what he has done, that it was done. God himself replies that it was done to display God's indignation and make his power known. See Romans 9:22. And who dares to question God's right to do as he wills with his own creation? Orthodox Christians insist that the die is cast at death. Your fate is sealed if you die without accepting Jesus. The die is cast. Too late, too late. Orthodox insist that the die is cast at death. According to its teachings, Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God at the Exodus, but he has consciously suffered for his sin ever since and will do so for all eternity. Yeah, that's what Orthodoxy teaches. The revolt against God's deity has its roots in unreasonable and irredeemable doctrines of human destiny. By means of the blood of Christ, his life will be justified. That is, Pharaoh's life will be justified, as well as all, according to Romans 5:18. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. I'm just reading the underlined parts. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. Blessed be the God who used my unworthy self. Oh, this is a prayer that Brother Knoch imagines that Pharaoh will pray on that day. Blessed be the God who used my unworthy self to exalt his name and spread his fame. It is an honor to have been trodden beneath his feet. That'll be a great testimony. Maybe we can get a jump start and make that our own prayer. God alone originates action. Whoo-wee. That's a big concept. God alone originates action. Let me back up and read a little bit more. Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Freedom in the creature does not consist in absolute independence of environment, but in accord with it. God alone originates action. Place, time, and circumstance control God's creatures. In reality, they have as little to say about the course of their existence as they had about their creation. And then in this, God's judgment sets matters right. That's a nice phrase. Why is, let's see, so with Satan, God's judgments is unique. No, Satan's judgments is unique. So with Satan, his judgment is unique. Why is he not cast into the lake of fire together with the beast and the false prophet at the beginning of the 1,000 years? Very good question. God must have a plan. He must be up to something. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan but repudiate the deity of God. Isn't that a fine sentence to highlight? Taking that out of context, I don't remember exactly why I highlighted it, but in the context, it seemed like it was pretty cool. Let's see. God is God. We are his creatures. God is God. We are his creatures. Okay. And then the final paragraph. It is only as we see his supreme success at the consummation, when he will be all in all of his creatures, that we are able to grasp the great truth of the deity of God. Only then can we turn back to the beginning and see him supreme. Only then can we look at the clouds and see him ride the storm. Only then can we believe him when he says in Isaiah 45, I am Yahweh and there is no other, former of light and creator of darkness, maker of good and creator of evil. I, Yahweh, make all these things and drip down from above heavens. Let the skies distill righteousness. Let the earth open up. Let salvation bud. Let the righteousness sprout together with it. I, Yahweh, created it. Would anyone contend with his former, earthenware of the ground with its artificer? The end. All right. Thanks for joining me for a reading of Mr. Knoch's little essay on the deity of God. And check back later. We might do another show, but I got some things to do. Take me at least about an hour to sort things out. Grace to you, Lawrence and St. Tommy and Gabe and Deborah and Lisa and Donna and Red Pill and Krishna, etc. Exit stage right.